Welcome. Find your position. Let the weight of the day begin to release from your shoulders. We are going somewhere that rewards stillness, somewhere that has been waiting in its own absolute patient way for the entire span of human history, without once caring whether we came or not. We call this planet explored. That is the story we tell ourselves. We have satellites that photograph every road, every building, every square meter of surface from space. We have mapped every mountain range, traced every river to its source, given names to every country and coastline and desert. The globe on the shelf, the map on the wall, they suggest a completed picture, a world fully known, a puzzle with no missing pieces. That story is only true if you stop at the water's edge. Beneath the surface of the ocean, beneath the blue that covers 71% of this planet, there is a world that is larger than all the continents combined, a world of which we have seen less than 25%, a world in which the average depth is 3,800 meters, and in which the deepest point descends to nearly 11,000 meters, a distance so far below the surface that if you placed Mount Everest at the bottom of it, the summit would still be more than 2 kilometers underwater. We have sent humans to the deepest point on Earth fewer times than we have sent them to the moon. Think about that. The moon is 384,000 kilometers away. The bottom of the Mariana Trench is less than 11 kilometers from the surface, and yet more people have stood on the lunar surface than have ever touched the floor of Challenger Deep. There is a reason for this. The deep ocean is not merely far away, it is actively hostile to our presence in a way that the vacuum of space is almost not by comparison. Space is empty. You have to bring everything with you, but the space itself offers no resistance. The deep ocean pushes back. It pushes back with the weight of thousands of meters of water pressing down from above, with a pressure so enormous that it compresses human tissue, collapses the air spaces in the lungs, and warps steel as if it were soft clay. To visit the deep ocean requires engineering of extraordinary precision. Vessels designed to withstand forces that should not be survivable, built to tolerances that leave almost no margin for error, sent into an environment where a single structural failure means death with no possibility of rescue. And yet, something is down there. Many things, things we have never seen, things we have seen once and not been able to classify. Things that produce light in a world where no light has ever arrived from above. Things that have been living in the permanent dark for longer than our species has existed, doing what living things do in a world so unlike the one you are lying in right now that they might as well be on another planet. They are not on another planet. They are here. They are on this planet. They are, at this exact moment, moving through darkness a few miles below the surface of an ocean that may not be far from where you are lying. They have never seen sunlight. They have never felt warmth from above. They exist in conditions that every assumption you have ever made about what life requires would say are impossible. And they thrive. Tonight, we are going to the place we have not been. Not away, not to another world, not to the edge of the solar system. Down, into the dark below the water, into the last unknown place on the planet we were born on, into the undiscovered world that has been here all along, waiting with a patience we can barely imagine, full of life and mystery and darkness and cold and the quiet, extraordinary persistence of things that found a way to exist without any of the things we assumed existence required. If this kind of slow, wandering journey into the unknown corners of the world you live on is why you came here tonight, I am very glad you are here. Consider subscribing if you have not yet, and leave a comment. Tell me where you are in the world, how close or how far from the ocean, and whether the idea of what is beneath that water right now, while you sleep, changes the feeling of it at all. Now close your eyes if they are not already closed. Let the surface world go quiet. Take one slow breath down to the very bottom of your lungs and let it go without effort. We are going down.
Every map has an edge. Not the edge of the paper, maps can be as large as you like, but the edge of knowledge. The point at which the careful detail of known geography gives way to something else. For most of human history, that edge was marked on old charts with a warning, and sometimes with illustrations of sea monsters, great coiling creatures in the blank spaces where the cartographers had run out of information and had no better way to communicate the message. Here, the known world ends. Here, we cannot tell you what is there. Here, you are on your own. We congratulate ourselves on having moved past that. Our modern maps have no blank spaces, no sea monsters, no warnings at the margins. They are continuous and complete and precise to a degree that the cartographers of earlier centuries would find almost miraculous. And in the sense that they describe the surface, the land and the coastlines and the shallow coastal waters, they are indeed essentially complete. The surface of the Earth is, by any reasonable standard, known. But the seafloor is a different map entirely, and that map still has edges. It still has blanks. It still has places where the detail gives way to uncertainty, where the resolution drops to kilometers rather than meters, where what we have is not a map at all, but an estimate, a reconstruction from acoustic soundings and gravity measurements and indirect inference, a sketch rather than a survey. The global map of the seafloor that most people have seen, the one that appears in textbooks and documentaries showing the mid-ocean ridges and the deep trenches and the vast abyssal plains, is not a detailed map in any meaningful sense. Most of it was created not by direct measurement, but by satellite altimetry, measuring the slight variations in the height of the ocean surface caused by the gravitational pull of the seafloor topography below. A large underwater mountain pulls water slightly toward it, creating a subtle elevation in the sea surface above. A deep trench creates a slight depression. These variations, measured from space, can be used to reconstruct the broad shape of the seafloor with a horizontal resolution of a few kilometers at best. A few kilometers. The surface of Mars has been mapped to a resolution of 20 meters. The Moon to a resolution of less than 1 meter in many areas. The seafloor of our own planet, at the resolution most of it has been surveyed, would not show you a feature smaller than a large city. Entire mountain ranges on the seafloor, ranges longer than the Himalayas and nearly as tall, have been discovered in the last few decades and are still only partially surveyed. The mid-ocean ridge system, which winds for 65,000 kilometers through all the world's ocean basins and represents the longest continuous mountain range on Earth, has been directly explored along only a tiny fraction of its length. There is a number that researchers in ocean science cite fairly regularly, and it lands differently every time you hear it. Less than 25% of the ocean floor has been mapped to a resolution sufficient to reveal features smaller than a few hundred meters. The rest, the remaining 75% of the seafloor, which is to say the remaining 53% of the entire surface of the planet, is, in any meaningful cartographic sense, unknown. We have not started. We have barely looked up from the shore. And here is the thing about unmapped territory that matters for tonight, that matters for the slow and wondering journey we are taking together in the dark. Unmapped territory is not empty territory. The blank spaces on the seafloor map are not blank because nothing is there. They are blank because we have not looked. They are filled with mountains and plains and volcanic fields and cold seeps and extraordinary, extraordinary life. Life that has never been observed. Life that may not have been imagined.
life that is going about its business right now in those unmapped regions with complete indifference to the fact that no human being has ever seen it. The world is not fully known. The planet is not fully explored. That is not a failure of science or a lapse in attention. It is simply the truth of the scale. The deep ocean is so vast, so hostile to our presence, so expensive and technically demanding to reach, that all of human effort applied to exploring it across the entire history of oceanography has produced a level of coverage that, if applied to a continent, would still leave most of it a mystery. We are at the beginning of knowing the deep ocean, right at the very beginning. And what we have found in the small fraction we have managed to see is so extraordinary that the prospect of what remains in the unseen majority is one of the most quietly thrilling facts in the history of science. Before we go deeper, before we enter the specific darkness of specific zones and meet the specific creatures who live in them, I want to spend a little time with pressure, with what pressure actually means at depth. Because pressure is the fundamental fact of the deep ocean, the thing that determines everything about what is possible there. And understanding it in your body, rather than just in your mind, is what makes the deep ocean feel as alien as it is. At the surface of the ocean, you are under atmospheric pressure, the weight of the entire column of air above you, pressing down. You have lived under this pressure your entire life. You do not feel it as pressure because everything about your body is built to be in equilibrium with it. The air in your lungs, in your sinuses, in the small spaces of your inner ear pushes outward with the same force that the atmosphere pushes inward. The two balance. You feel nothing. Water is about 800 times denser than air. Every 10 meters you descend in the ocean adds another full atmosphere of pressure, the equivalent of adding the entire weight of the Earth's atmosphere to the weight already pressing on you. At 10 meters depth, you are under 2 atmospheres. At 100 meters, 11 atmospheres. At 1,000 meters, the beginning of what oceanographers call the midnight zone, you are under 101 atmospheres. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the pressure is approximately 1,090 atmospheres, 1,090 times the pressure at the surface. Steel begins to deform under this pressure. The air spaces in the human body, lungs, sinuses, the middle ear, would collapse, compressed by the weight of the water above, into fractions of their normal volume. The nitrogen in the blood would dissolve under the pressure and form bubbles in the tissue when you tried to ascend, a condition called decompression sickness that is agonizing and often fatal. The pressure would, in any unprotected human body, produce effects that are simply incompatible with continued existence. And yet, life is there. Life has been there for hundreds of millions of years. The organisms that live at depth are not simply tolerating the pressure, they have evolved to require it. Their cell membranes, their proteins, their enzyme systems are all calibrated for the specific pressures of their specific depth zone. Bring a deep-sea creature to the surface, and the sudden reduction in pressure is often as fatal as the increase would be for you. They are creatures of pressure, the way you are a creature of the surface. Their world has a weight to it that yours does not, and they are built for that weight, the way you are built for air and light. This is worth holding in your mind as we go deeper tonight. Every creature we meet from here on lives under conditions that would kill you instantly. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, simply physically, certainly. The pressure would end you in moments. And yet those creatures are going about their lives with the same quiet biological urgency that all life everywhere displays. Feeding, reproducing, avoiding being eaten, finding a place in the ecosystem, doing what living things do, in a world whose physical parameters make ours feel like a greenhouse by comparison. The deep ocean is not hospitable to us, but it is hospitable to something. and what that something has become over hundreds of millions of years of evolution in the dark, under crushing pressure in near-freezing water, is one of the most extraordinary stories that biology has ever produced. The deepest parts of the ocean have their own name, the Hadal zone, named as the Hadean eon of early Earth was named for the Greek underworld, refers specifically to the trenches, the narrow, elongated depressions in the seafloor that form at subduction zones, where one tectonic plate dives beneath another, dragging the seafloor down into steep-sided furrows that extend far deeper than the surrounding abyssal plain. The Hadal zone begins at 6,000 meters and extends to the maximum depth of the ocean. It is, by any measure, the most extreme environment on the surface of the planet. There are 33 Hadal trenches in the world's oceans. Most of them are in the Pacific, which is older and more tectonically active than the Atlantic. The Mariana Trench, east of the Mariana Islands in the western Pacific, is the deepest, containing within it a specific point called Challenger Deep that has been measured repeatedly and with improving precision at approximately 10,935 meters. This is the deepest known point on the Earth's surface. It is deeper than the average depth of the ocean by more than 7 kilometers. The first humans to reach Challenger Deep were the Swiss oceanographer Jacques Piccard and the United States Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh aboard the bathyscaphe Trieste on the 23rd of January, 1960. Their descent took 4 hours and 48 minutes. Their time on the bottom, the very bottom of the ocean, the lowest point on the planet, was 20 minutes. During those 20 minutes, before the silt disturbed by their arrival had even settled, Piccard observed something through the small viewport of the pressure sphere. Something moving, something alive. He later described it as a flatfish, a flounder or sole, roughly 30 centimeters long, lying on the sediment of the deepest place on Earth, looking up at the light of the Trieste with what he described as a calm indifference. This observation has been disputed. The pressure at Challenger Deep is so extreme that most biologists consider vertebrate fish physiologically impossible there. The proteins and cell membranes that vertebrate biology depends on are disrupted by pressure of that magnitude. The creature Piccard saw was more likely a sea cucumber, a soft-bodied invertebrate that can adopt a flattened, fish-like appearance. But the dispute itself is interesting. The fact that a careful, trained observer in the first and most austere conditions of deep ocean exploration looked at the very bottom of the world and thought he saw a fish, a vertebrate, a creature with bones and eyes and a nervous system, tells you something about the deep ocean's capacity to confound expectation. Even at the very limit of biological possibility, you cannot be quite certain what you are seeing. The deep ocean keeps its secrets well. After Piccard and Walsh, Challenger Deep was not visited again for more than 50 years. In 2012, the filmmaker James Cameron made the third crewed descent, alone, in a specially designed vehicle called the Deep Sea Challenger. He spent approximately 3 hours on the bottom, filming with cameras mounted on the exterior of the craft, collecting sediment samples, and observing whatever moved through the lights of his vehicle in the dark. What he found was not empty. The sediment was alive, teeming with microscopic life, with small crustaceans called amphipods, with organisms so adapted to the extreme pressure and cold and dark of the Hadal zone that they have evolved into something quite different from their shallow water relatives. The amphipods of the deep trenches are not tiny. They are, by the standards of their lineage, enormous. Some species reaching lengths of 30 centimeters, 10 times the size of their surface water cousins, a manifestation of the phenomenon called deep-sea gigantism that we will return to later. They were present in the samples and in the footage in quantities that surprised the researchers. The bottom of the world is not barren. It is colonized. It has been colonized, in all likelihood, for millions of years. But here is something that was also found in those amphipods at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and in the sediment of Challenger Deep, and in the tissues of creatures living at the very limit of biological possibility on the deepest seafloor on Earth. Something that was not there 100 years ago. Something that has reached the bottom of the world before most of the scientific expeditions that went looking. Microplastics. Plastic fibers and fragments derived from synthetic materials that did not exist before the 20th century have been found in the digestive systems of amphipods at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench. In some samples, the concentration of plastic contamination in the trench fauna is higher than in surface waters. The deepest place on Earth, the most remote and inaccessible environment on the planet, a place that humans have visited only a handful of times in all of history, has already been reached by what we casually discard. The deep ocean is not separate from us. It receives everything. Slowly, silently, over years and decades, everything we put into the ocean finds its way down, through the water column, through the bodies of the organisms that eat it and are eaten in turn, through the slow settling of particles toward the seafloor. The abyss is the ultimate destination of everything that enters the ocean, including us. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We are still near the surface, relatively speaking. And to understand the deep ocean properly, to feel it rather than merely know it, we need to descend more slowly, layer by layer, zone by zone, following the light as it fades and following what happens to life as the light goes.
The sunlit zone of the ocean, the epipelagic, the upper 200 meters where enough light penetrates to support photosynthesis, is the ocean most of us know. The blue-green surface water, the coral reefs, the schooling fish, the plankton blooms that turn the sea pale green from space during the spring. This is the ocean of documentaries and snorkeling holidays, and the mental image most people carry when they think of the sea. Below 200 meters, the photosynthesis stops. Not abruptly, light penetrates below 200 meters, fading gradually rather than cutting off. But the intensity drops below the threshold at which phytoplankton can fix carbon from the water faster than they consume it through their own respiration. Below 200 meters, the primary producers of the ocean, the phytoplankton that are the base of almost every marine food chain, can no longer function. The surface ecosystem ends. What begins instead is the twilight zone, the mesopelagic layer, extending from 200 to 1,000 meters depth. Here, the light is not absent, but attenuated, a dim blue-gray diffusion, sufficient to see by at 200 meters, fading to a faint glow at 500 meters, essentially gone by 1,000. At noon on a clear day in the tropics, the light at 200 meters is perhaps 1% of the surface light. At 500 meters, it is a fraction of a percent. At 1,000 meters, instruments can still detect photons from the surface, but no human eye would register anything in that darkness as light. The twilight zone is one of the least studied ecosystems on Earth, despite being one of the largest. It occupies an enormous volume of the ocean, the entire water column between 200 and 1,000 meters, across an ocean that covers most of the planet. The organisms that live in this zone represent a biomass that researchers believe may be larger than all other marine animal life combined. They are present in quantities so vast that they appear on sonar readings as a false bottom, a layer of dense biological material that sits below the true seafloor on early sonar displays, confusing the researchers who first encountered it in the 1940s. They called it the deep scattering layer, and for years they debated what it was. Eventually, they understood it was life.
an enormous, continuous layer of small fish and crustaceans and gelatinous creatures extending across entire ocean basins, rising toward the surface at night and descending at dawn in the largest daily migration on Earth. Every night, across all the world's oceans, billions of small creatures, lanternfish and bristlemouth fish and myctophids, krill and copepods and small squid, siphonophores trailing tentacles for meters through the dark water, rise from the twilight zone toward the surface to feed in the relative richness of the sunlit world above. And before dawn, they descend again, carrying in their bodies the carbon they have consumed from the surface waters, transporting it downward, releasing some of it as they respire and defecate in the deep, sequestering it away from the atmosphere in a process that oceanographers call the biological pump. This migration is invisible to us. It happens below the surface, in darkness, across areas of ocean that no human being is watching at any given moment. It has been happening every night for hundreds of millions of years. And it moves more carbon from the surface to the deep ocean, more carbon out of potential contact with the atmosphere than almost any other biological process on Earth. The Twilight Zone, ignored and largely unstudied, may be one of the most important carbon sinks on the planet. What do the creatures of the Twilight Zone look like? When researchers have managed to capture or film them, which is difficult because the pressure change involved in bringing them to the surface often kills or badly damages the specimens, and because filming in the dim light of the mesopelagic requires specialist equipment, they are extraordinary. The lanternfish, which make up a large proportion of the deep scattering layer, are small, typically 5 to 15 centimeters, but covered with photophores, small light-producing organs arranged in species-specific patterns along their sides and bellies. In the dim blue light of the Twilight Zone, these lights serve as camouflage, a phenomenon called counterillumination, in which an animal produces light on its underside to match the faint downwelling light from above, making it invisible to predators looking upward from the darkness below. The Twilight Zone is not dark in the way we imagine darkness. It is dim and blue and biologically luminous, filled with the cold light of creatures advertising their presence, masking their silhouettes, hunting and being hunted in the last light before the true darkness begins. And at 1,000 meters, the last photon from the surface fades. The twilight ends. The midnight begins. Here is something that I want to give you as a gift before we go into the darkest parts of tonight's journey. An image to carry with you into the deep, something that reframes what you mean when you think of darkness. 76% of the animals that live in the deep ocean produce their own light. Not a small fraction, not a specialized handful of unusual species. 76%. The deep ocean is not dark in the way a dark room is dark, not simply the absence of light. It is a world full of cold, moving, biological light. Light produced by living things for purposes that evolution has refined over hundreds of millions of years, to attract prey, to communicate, to confuse predators, to find mates, to illuminate the darkness just enough to see by. The chemistry of bioluminescence is, at its core, a reaction between a molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase in the presence of oxygen. The reaction produces light with an efficiency that human technology has never approached. Almost no energy is wasted as heat. Almost all of it is converted directly into photons. It is the most efficient light-producing mechanism known, and it evolved independently, not once, not twice, but at least 40 separate times in the history of life. In bacteria, in dinoflagellates, in jellyfish, in worms, in crustaceans, in squid, in fish, in species so distantly related to each other that the same solution to the same problem was discovered over and over again across hundreds of millions of years of separate evolutionary history. This repeated independent evolution of the same solution tells you something important. It tells you that in the deep ocean, light is not merely useful, it is so useful, so critical to survival, that evolution kept finding it again and again. In an environment where no external light source exists, the organism that can produce its own light has an advantage so significant that the elaborate chemical machinery required to produce bioluminescence is worth the metabolic cost. Over and over and over again, in lineage after lineage, the deep ocean found light. The variety of bioluminescent displays in the deep ocean defies easy description. There are dinoflagellates, microscopic single-celled organisms that produce brief flashes of blue light when disturbed by water movement, creating the phenomenon of bioluminescent waves that occasionally lights up the bow waves of ships and the footsteps of people walking on certain beaches at night. The light in those waves is the alarm response of billions of individual organisms, each one producing a flash that lasts a fraction of a second, collectively producing something that looks, to a human observer, like the ocean is on fire in blue. There are deep-sea jellyfish and siphonophores, colonial organisms that can stretch for tens of meters, trailing tentacles in every direction, that produce light in complex patterns, pulses moving along the length of the colony in sequences that may serve as communication or as a means of startling and confusing potential predators. There are squid that can control the pattern and intensity of bioluminescent displays on their skin with a precision that suggests something closer to active signaling than passive defense. There are fish, the dragonfish, the viperfish, the loosejaw, that have evolved bioluminescent lures or chin barbels or photophores of extraordinary complexity, each one a solution to the specific ecological problem of finding food in the dark. And there is the anglerfish. We will spend more time with the anglerfish later, but for now, simply know that the most famous bioluminescent lure in the deep ocean, the cold blue-white glow on the tip of the modified dorsal fin spine that the female anglerfish dangles above her wide-open mouth in the darkness, is a structure of such evolutionary elegance and such functional precision that it has become, for many people, the image they carry when they think of the deep sea. A cold light in absolute darkness, a beacon in the abyss, a trap disguised as a wonder. The deep ocean is full of light. It is cold light, chemical light, biological light, light that has nothing to do with the sun and everything to do with the long, patient work of evolution, finding solutions to the problem of existing in the dark. When you imagine the deep ocean tonight as you drift toward sleep, do not imagine it as a black void. Imagine it as something stranger and more beautiful than that. A darkness full of moving lights, pulsing and flashing and glowing in the cold water, each one a living thing going about the urgent business of survival, illuminating nothing but itself, visible for moments and then gone. Below 1,000 meters, the last trace of sunlight is gone. Not faded, gone. There are no photons from the surface at this depth. The darkness is total and permanent, and has been total and permanent since the ocean formed. It is darkness in the absolute sense, not the darkness of a closed room where your eyes adjust and faint light under doors and around windows eventually reveals something, not the darkness of a clear night where stars and the moon provide a dim illumination, not the darkness of a cave where human lighting can reach. The darkness of the deep ocean below 1,000 meters is darkness in the way that the interior of a sealed box is dark, complete, permanent, irremediable by any external source. And yet, the zone between 1,000 and 4,000 meters, the bathypelagic, the midnight zone, is one of the most biologically rich and poorly understood ecosystems on Earth. The creatures here do not need sunlight. They have evolved entirely beyond it. Their eyes, where they have eyes, are not tuned to the visible spectrum in any conventional sense. Many have evolved enormous tubular eyes that gather as much light as possible from the faint bioluminescence of other organisms. Some have evolved eyes pointing upward to detect the silhouettes of prey or predators against the slightly less dark water above. Some have lost their eyes entirely, replacing visual processing with extraordinary sensitivity to pressure changes and water movement, lateral line systems so acute that they can detect the bow wave of an approaching predator or the swimming motion of prey at distances of several meters in complete darkness. The fish of the midnight zone are among the most extraordinary in the ocean. The viperfish, Choliotis sloani, is a creature that looks, to a human eye, almost deliberately designed to be frightening. It is perhaps 30 centimeters long, with a body that is largely transparent and a mouth full of fang-like teeth so large relative to the size of its head that it cannot close its mouth fully. The teeth protrude outside the jaw, curving back toward the body like the fangs of a trap. The first vertebra of the viperfish's spine acts as a shock absorber, allowing it to ram prey at speed without shattering its own skeleton. It hunts in absolute darkness by sensing the pressure waves of moving creatures, striking with a speed and force that its prey has no time to detect or respond to. The dragonfish of the genus Aristostomius have evolved something even stranger. Most bioluminescent light in the deep ocean is blue, the wavelength that travels furthest in water, the wavelength that deep sea eyes have evolved to detect. A creature that produces blue light can be seen by other creatures with blue sensitive eyes. So, some dragonfish have evolved the ability to produce red light, a wavelength that almost no other deep-sea organism can see. The dragonfish can illuminate its prey with a searchlight that is, to every other organism in the midnight zone, invisible. It hunts by a light that only it can see. The black dragonfish, Gigantism fasciola, takes this further still. It not only produces red bioluminescence, but has evolved red-sensitive visual pigments in its eyes, allowing it to see in a wavelength of light that it alone produces and it alone can detect. It has invented its own private spectrum, its own secret light, a communication and hunting system that operates in the midst of a dark ocean full of other creatures without any of them knowing it is happening. This is what millions of years of evolution in complete darkness produces. Not simplification, not degradation, not the slow withering of unused capacities. Elaboration, specialization, the most precise and creative biological engineering on the planet, driven by the relentless pressure of survival in an environment where every advantage matters and no resource can be wasted. The midnight zone is not a place where life has retreated from the challenges of existence. It is a place where life has met those challenges with an ingenuity that the sunlit world has never needed to match.
In 1977, a research vessel called the Nor was operating in the Pacific Ocean near the Galapagos Islands, deploying a camera sled to photograph the seafloor at approximately 2,500 meters depth. The scientists aboard were looking for evidence of hydrothermal activity, geological signs that volcanically heated water was venting from the seafloor in this tectonically active region. They expected to find warm water and perhaps some mineral deposits. What the camera sled sent back changed biology. The photographs showed clustered communities of animals around the vents, not sparse, not incidental, but dense and thriving and extraordinary. Giant tube worms and white tubes, their plumes of red feeding tissue extended into the warm water, clustered together in fields of hundreds. Large white clams and mussels in aggregations that looked like the beds of shallow water shellfish, but were 2.5 kilometers underwater, in a place where the water should have been near freezing and essentially devoid of food. Crabs, shrimp, fish,
all of them apparently thriving in a location where, by every prior understanding of how deep ocean life worked, they should not have been able to exist. The key to understanding what was happening at the Galapagos Rift vents and at the hundreds of other hydrothermal vent systems that have since been discovered along mid-ocean ridges around the world is the concept of chemosynthesis. Almost all life on Earth, at every level of the food chain, ultimately traces its energy back to sunlight. Plants capture solar energy through photosynthesis. Animals eat plants or eat animals that eat plants. The sun is the engine. Without it, the food chain collapses. But at hydrothermal vents, there is no sunlight. The vents are thousands of meters below the surface in complete darkness. And yet, the food chain does not collapse. It runs on a different engine entirely. The vents release water that has been circulating through the oceanic crust, heated by the magma below and chemically altered by that heating. This water carries dissolved hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas, the chemical that gives rotten eggs their characteristic smell, and other reduced chemical compounds. And in the warm, chemical-rich water immediately around the vents, bacteria have evolved the ability to do what plants do with sunlight, to take inorganic compounds and use the energy released by their chemical reaction to build organic molecules, chemosynthesis. Life powered not by light, but by the chemical energy of the Earth's own interior. These chemosynthetic bacteria are the base of the vent food chain. They live in the warm water around the vent, they colonize the hard surfaces of the vent structures, and, most remarkably, they live inside the tissues of the larger organisms. The giant tube worms of hydrothermal vents, Riftia pachyptila, have no mouth and no digestive system in the conventional sense. Their large, feathery red plumes absorb hydrogen sulfide and oxygen from the vent water. Their internal cavity, the trophosome, is packed with chemosynthetic bacteria, which use the hydrogen sulfide to fix carbon, producing organic molecules that feed both themselves and the tube worm that houses them. The tube worm and the bacteria are so intimately integrated that they function as a single organism, each providing what the other needs, neither able to survive alone. This discovery, that life can exist entirely independently of solar energy, using the chemical energy of the deep Earth as a primary energy source, was one of the most significant biological discoveries of the 20th century. It meant that the assumption of photosynthesis as the universal foundation of life on Earth was wrong. It meant that life is possible in environments previously considered biologically sterile. And it meant something else, something that scientists and astrobiologists immediately recognized and have been thinking about ever since. If life can exist without sunlight here, in the deep, cold ocean, supported by the volcanic chemistry of a planetary interior, then life might exist anywhere that has liquid water and geological activity. Europa, the moon of Jupiter, has a global ocean of liquid water beneath its icy surface, kept liquid by the tidal heating of Jupiter's gravity. Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, has been observed venting water and organic compounds from cracks in its south polar ice, suggesting a subsurface ocean with active hydrothermal chemistry. If the deep ocean vents of Earth support thriving ecosystems without any sunlight at all, then the subsurface oceans of the outer solar system, dark, pressurized, chemically active, may support life too. The tube worms of the Galapagos Rift changed not just our understanding of life on Earth, they changed our understanding of where in the universe life might exist. All from a camera sled in the Pacific in 1977, looking for something else entirely.
Beyond the vents, beyond the trenches, beyond the dramatic topography of the mid-ocean ridges, covering more than half the floor of the ocean and more than a third of the entire surface of the planet, lies the abyssal plain, the flattest, most featureless, most remote landscape on Earth. A vast, dark, cold, almost unimaginably empty expanse of soft sediment at depths of 3,000 to 6,000 meters,
where the temperature is a degree or two above freezing, where the pressure is hundreds of atmospheres, and where the only input of energy from above arrives as a slow, steady, sparse rain of organic particles drifting down from the sunlit world thousands of meters overhead. This rain is called marine snow. Not snow in the meteorological sense, not frozen water, but snow in the appearance. Small white particles of organic material, visible in the beam of a deep-sea submersible's lights as a constant, gentle downfall of white flakes through the dark water. Each flake is a fragment of dead organic matter, a piece of a dead phytoplankton cell, a fragment of fecal pellet from a zooplankton in the Twilight zone, a clump of mucus shed from a gelatinous organism, a dead bacterium that has been sinking through the water column for days or weeks or months, gradually decomposing as it falls, being consumed by bacteria and small animals along the way, losing most of its carbon before it reaches the bottom. What arrives at the abyssal floor after this long, slow fall is the residue of the residue, the least digestible, most refractory fraction of the organic material that began its journey at the surface. In terms of caloric content, it is the most dilute food source of any ecosystem on Earth. The abyssal plain is, by any measure, a food desert. The density of organic input per square meter of seafloor is a tiny fraction of what the richest surface ecosystems receive. And yet, the abyssal plain is alive. Not richly alive, not biodiverse in the way a coral reef or a hydrothermal vent is biodiverse, but alive in a persistent, patient, extraordinary way. The sediment of the abyssal plain, the thick, soft accumulation of clay and the compressed remnants of plankton skeletons that has been building up for millions of years, is home to communities of organisms adapted to the near-total scarcity of food. Sea cucumbers move slowly across the sediment surface, filtering the marine snow as it settles. Polycate worms, tiny and thin, thread through the sediment, eating bacteria. Foraminifera, single-celled organisms that build elaborate calcium carbonate shells, are present in the abyssal sediment in numbers that are almost incomprehensible. A single gram of abyssal sediment can contain thousands of foraminiferan shells, and the cumulative weight of their shells over geological time forms the limestone deposits that cover large areas of the deep ocean floor, and which, when uplifted by tectonic processes, become the chalk cliffs and limestone hills of the land surface. Time moves differently on the abyssal plain. The pace of life is slow, in the way that all life in cold, food-poor environments is slow. Metabolisms reduced to a minimum, growth rates measured in years rather than weeks, lifespans extended far beyond what equivalent shallow water species achieve. Some deep-sea fish have been aged at over 100 years. Some deep-sea corals, cold-water corals that grow on seamounts and rocky outcroppings across the deep ocean, have been dated at thousands of years old, their slow calcium carbonate growth rings recording centuries of quiet existence in the cold dark. The abyssal plain is the most patient ecosystem on Earth. It has been doing what it does, filtering the slow rain of organic material from above, cycling it through the sediment community, storing carbon in the deep-sea sediment for geological timescales, since long before complex life existed on land. It will be doing it long after whatever happens on the surface has run its course. The abyss does not depend on us. It predates us. It will outlast us. And it carries in its sediment record a continuous archive of everything that has happened in the overlying ocean for hundreds of millions of years. There is a rule in biology that does not hold everywhere, but holds often enough in the deep ocean to constitute a genuine phenomenon. In the deep sea, things that are small at the surface grow large. The rule is called deep-sea gigantism, And while its causes are still debated and its limits are real, the examples are striking enough to make a list that reads more like mythology than ecology. The giant isopod. Isopods are crustaceans, the group that includes the pill bugs and woodlice of your garden, creatures typically a centimeter or two in length, armored and segmented, scuttling under leaf litter and in the damp spaces under rocks. In the deep ocean, isopods grow to lengths of 50 centimeters or more. The giant isopod Bathynomus giganteus is, by the scale of its shallow water relatives, a monster, a creature the size of a rugby ball, armored in tough, overlapping plates, with compound eyes that look like they belong on an animal from a science fiction film. It scavenges the abyssal plain, consuming dead fish and whale falls with a thorough, unhurried efficiency, capable of surviving without food for months or years between meals. The giant squid. Architeuthis dux, the giant squid, was for most of human history a creature of mythology, the kraken of Norse legend, the sea monster of sailors' accounts, the thing that left sucker scars on the skin of sperm whales. The first photographs of a living giant squid in its natural habitat were not taken until 2004. The first video footage of a living giant squid was not obtained until 2012. Before that, everything known about giant squid was derived from dead specimens, bodies that had washed ashore or been recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales, and from the accounts of fishermen who occasionally hauled them up in nets. Adult giant squid can reach lengths of 13 meters, including their long tentacles. Their eyes are the largest of any known animal alive today, up to 30 centimeters in diameter, larger than a dinner plate, adapted for seeing in the faint bioluminescent light of the deep ocean. They hunt fish and other squid and are themselves hunted by sperm whales, which dive to depths of over 2 kilometers in pursuit of them. The battles between sperm whales and giant squid, evidenced by the sucker scar rings found on the skin of whales and the squid beaks recovered from whale stomachs, are among the most dramatic interactions in the ocean, occurring in complete darkness at depths we have barely visited, between animals of extraordinary size in a world we know almost nothing about. The colossal squid, Mesonyctuthis hamiltoni, found in the deep southern ocean around Antarctica, is potentially even larger, heavier than the giant squid, with hooks rather than suckers on its tentacles, and with eyes that may be even larger. Only a handful of specimens have ever been recovered. The vast majority of what we know about the colossal squid comes from beaks found in the stomachs of sperm whales and sleeper sharks. The living animal, its behavior, its ecology, its full size range, its reproduction, remains almost entirely unknown. And then there is the siphonophore. Not a giant in the way a single large animal is giant, but perhaps the longest organism ever recorded on Earth. Siphonophores are colonial organisms, not a single animal, but a colony of genetically identical individuals called zoolids, each one specialized for a specific function. Some for swimming, some for feeding, some for reproduction, all of them connected in a chain that can extend to 45 meters or more in length. They are largely transparent, drifting through the deep water, trailing their long chains of specialized bodies and their feeding tentacles, capable of expanding and contracting their form, producing bioluminescent flashes when disturbed. The longest individual organism ever measured on Earth, a siphonophore photographed off the coast of Western Australia in 2020, estimated at approximately 45 meters in length, is a creature that most people have never heard of, living in a part of the ocean we rarely visit, doing something in the dark that we barely understand. Why do things grow large in the deep ocean? The causes are genuinely debated. Cold water slows metabolism and may extend growth periods. Food scarcity may select for larger body size because larger animals can fast for longer between meals. The absence of strong tidal and wave forces may reduce the metabolic cost of movement. Deep-sea gigantism may also reflect the retention of ancestral traits. The ancient relatives of modern crustaceans and other invertebrates may have been large, and the stable, cold, deep ocean may have preserved body sizes that were selected away in the more competitive, faster-paced environments of shallow water. Whatever the cause, the effect is real and repeated. In the deep ocean, the small become large, the brief become long-lived, and the ordinary become extraordinary in ways that remind you, every time you encounter a new example, that the rules of the world you know do not apply down there. The deep ocean writes its own rules, and it has been writing them undisturbed for far longer than we have been around to notice.
Every deep-sea expedition returns with something that was not expected. This is not a figure of speech. It is the consistent, documented experience of ocean researchers who have spent careers in deep-sea biology. The certainty, grown from experience, that the deep ocean will produce something on every dive that the researchers did not anticipate and cannot immediately explain. The deep ocean is not running out of surprises. It may be running out of researchers fast enough to process the surprises it keeps producing. Some of what has been found defies easy categorization. In 2020, researchers from the Schmidt Ocean Institute, deploying an underwater vehicle off the coast of Western Australia, filmed a siphonophore of a species never previously recorded, in a size range that set a new record for the longest organism ever observed. In 2021, scientists exploring the deep waters near Easter Island found a new species of whale. Not a new population, not a new subspecies, but a new species, a beaked whale previously unknown to science, identified from an animal that had stranded on a beach and whose unusual appearance had puzzled researchers for years, before genetic analysis revealed it was something genuinely new. A new species of whale, in the 21st century, in an ocean we have been studying for centuries. In 2019, a deep-sea expedition in the Indian Ocean discovered a previously unknown field of polymetallic nodules, potato-sized lumps of manganese and iron and cobalt and nickel lying on the abyssal plain, covering an area the size of a small country in water that had not been previously surveyed at that resolution. The nodules themselves were known. Fields of polymetallic nodules have been found across large areas of the Pacific abyssal plain since the 1960s and are now the subject of intense commercial interest as potential sources of the metals needed for battery technology. But their full extent was not known because the abyssal plain had not been mapped in sufficient detail to reveal it. The sounds of the deep ocean are their own chapter of the unexplained. The ocean is not silent. It is, in some frequency ranges, one of the noisiest environments on Earth, carrying the sounds of tectonic plate movement and submarine earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and the low-frequency calls of whales that can travel thousands of kilometers through the deep sound channel. But within that noise, there are anomalies, sounds that do not fit any known source, that have been recorded repeatedly without explanation, that continue to generate genuine scientific uncertainty. The bloop, recorded in 1997 by hydrophones of the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was an ultra-low-frequency, high-amplitude sound that was picked up by sensors thousands of kilometers apart. For years, it was unexplained. In 2012, NOAA concluded that it was almost certainly the sound of a large ice quake, the fracturing and movement of a large Antarctic ice shelf. The explanation was eventually satisfying,
But the period of uncertainty, the years during which the bloop was genuinely unexplained, produced one of the more remarkable moments in recent marine science: the honest admission by researchers with access to the most sophisticated listening equipment in the world that they had heard something in the ocean and did not know what it was. The Western Pacific biotwang, recorded in the Mariana Trench region in 2014 and 2015, has not been cleanly resolved. It is a complex multi-part sound lasting about 3 seconds, rising from low groaning tones to a high metallic twang. The leading hypothesis is that it is a biological call, perhaps from a minke whale, whose vocalization repertoire in the deep Pacific is not fully documented. But the sound does not closely match any known whale call. It has not been recorded near any observed whale behavior. It remains, in the formal scientific sense, unexplained. And then there are the reports that are harder to discuss in scientific terms, but that persistent researchers keep encountering. Accounts from submersible pilots and underwater vehicle operators of very large movements in the water, pressure waves consistent with something large passing close by, detected by instruments but not resolved by cameras. Large dark shapes at the edge of sensor range, things that the equipment registered and the cameras did not catch. The deep ocean is dark. The lights of a submersible illuminate a cone of perhaps 10 to 15 meters in any direction. Beyond that cone is absolute darkness, and anything beyond that darkness is undetectable. Whatever is in that darkness, whatever moves through the water just beyond the reach of the lights, remains, by definition, unknown. This is not mysticism, it is honest epistemology. We do not know what is in the dark beyond the lights. We have not looked. The deep ocean is large enough and poorly enough sampled that the existence of large organisms we have never encountered is not merely possible, it is, according to the statistical models of deep-sea biodiversity, essentially certain. The question is not whether there are large unknown organisms in the deep ocean. The question is how large and how strange and how far outside our current understanding of marine biology they turn out to be.
We go back down now, back to the deepest places, back to the Hadal zone, the zone of the trenches, where the question is not whether life exists, we know it does, but how, and what adaptations make existence possible at the very limit of biological tolerance. The amphipods of the Hadal trenches are the best-studied Hadal organisms, partly because they are abundant enough to be collected in meaningful numbers, and partly because they are robust enough to survive the pressure change of being brought to the surface, unlike many Hadal organisms, which die or are badly damaged by decompression before researchers can study them in detail. The Hadal amphipods of the genus Hirondella are found in all the major trenches of the Pacific at depths exceeding 6,000 meters. They are scavengers attracted to food falls, dead fish, whale carcasses, any significant organic input that reaches the trench floor from distances that suggest an extraordinary chemical sensitivity. A baited trap lowered to Hadal depths in the Mariana Trench can be covered with amphipods within minutes of arriving on the bottom. They are fast, numerous, and voracious, and they represent the primary pathway by which large organic inputs to the trench floor are processed and incorporated into the Hadal food web. But the amphipods have revealed something unexpected in recent years, something that has become one of the more discussed findings in deep-sea biology. When researchers analyzed the lipids in the tissues of amphipods from the deepest trenches, they found something that should not have been possible given the remoteness and inaccessibility of those depths. They found persistent organic pollutants,
PCBs and PBDEs, industrial chemicals that were widely used in manufacturing in the 20th century and that have been largely banned since the 1970s and 1980s due to their toxicity and environmental persistence. They found them in the tissues of amphipods at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, at concentrations that in some cases exceeded the levels found in highly polluted surface waters. How did industrial chemicals from the 20th century reach the deepest point in the ocean? Through the food chain and through the water column. Persistent organic pollutants do not break down. They bind to fatty organic material. They accumulate up the food chain, a process called biomagnification, in which each step in the food web concentrates the pollutants from the step below, and they settle slowly and inevitably through the water column, concentrated in the particles of marine snow, into the sediment of the deep ocean, and eventually into the tissues of the organisms that live there. The Hadal trenches act as sinks. They are the ultimate depositories for everything that enters the ocean, including the chemical residues of a century of industrial production. The most remote and inaccessible places on Earth are not untouched. They are the places where everything ends up. And yet, the snailfish persist. The Hadal snailfish, species of the genus Pseudoliparus, are the deepest living vertebrates known on Earth. They have been observed and filmed at depths exceeding 8,000 meters in the Mariana Trench, moving with a relaxed, almost casual buoyancy through the darkness, feeding on the amphipods, completely at home in conditions that represent the absolute physical limit of vertebrate biology. They are pale and gelatinous, their bones partly cartilaginous to resist the pressure, their cells containing high concentrations of a stabilizing compound called trimethylamine oxide that protects their proteins from pressure denaturation. They are, in their particular depth range, the apex predators, the top of the food chain at the bottom of the world, hunting amphipods in the dark under 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, doing so with an ease that makes the engineering required to send a submersible to the same depth seem almost embarrassingly labored by comparison. In 2023, a snailfish was filmed at a depth of 8,336 meters in the Izu Ogasawara Trench, south of Japan, the deepest a fish has ever been observed on camera. It was filmed calmly swimming, apparently unfazed by the presence of the remotely operated camera, going about its business in the absolute dark of the Hadal zone, as if the extraordinary conditions of its existence were simply the conditions of existence, which for it, they are.
This is the act that I have been building towards since we began. Not what we know, but what we do not know. Not what has been found, but what has not been found. Not the confirmed and cataloged and explained, but the still dark, the still unknown, the reasonable and scientifically grounded possibility of things in the deep ocean that have not yet been encountered by any human instrument or human eye. The deep ocean is estimated to contain somewhere between 500,000 and 10 million species. The range of that estimate, a factor of 20 between the lower and upper bounds, tells you something essential about how little we know. Current taxonomic knowledge of deep-sea species numbers perhaps 20,000 described species. If the lower estimate of 500,000 is correct, we have described 4% of what is down there. If the upper estimate is closer to the truth, we have described 0.2%. 0.2%. Every named and described species in the deep ocean, every creature that has been collected and photographed and given a Latin binomial and placed in the tree of life, represents 0.2% of what may be living in the deep water and the deep sediment of the planet's oceans.
The remaining 99.8% is out there, going about its business, completely indifferent to whether we ever find it. Among the things we have not found, or have found only in incomplete and tantalizing fragments, are large animals. Not microbes, not small invertebrates, large, macroscopic, potentially very large animals that leave traces we have found without finding the animal itself. The beaks of large squid recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales that are larger than the beaks of any squid species currently described. The scars on sperm whale skin that correspond to suckers or hooks larger than those of any known cephalopod. The occasional sonar contact, a large, moving, deep-water object that does not match the acoustic signature of any known species and that disappears before it can be investigated further. None of this constitutes proof of large, unknown animals. Each individual piece of evidence has an alternative explanation. The large beaks may belong to individual giant squid at the larger end of a size range we have not fully characterized. The sonar contacts may be artifacts or schools of smaller organisms. The scars on whale skin may have been misinterpreted. Science requires rigor, and rigor means not concluding more than the evidence supports. But science also requires honest accounting of what is not known. And what is honestly not known about the deep ocean is so vast, and the confirmed examples of large unknown organisms discovered in recent decades are frequent enough. New whale species, new shark species, new giant cephalopods, new species of large fish, that the possibility of significant biological surprises remaining in the unexplored majority of the deep ocean is not speculation. It is a straightforward implication of the baseline data. We have not found everything. We have not come close to finding everything, and the things we have not found include, with reasonable probability, things that will surprise us when we find them. That sentence, "we have not come close to finding everything," is true of no other environment on Earth. Not the deepest caves, not the most remote forests, not the ice sheets or the high atmosphere. Only the deep ocean retains in the 21st century the honest and scientific possibility of significant biological unknowns at the macroscopic scale. Only the deep ocean is still, in this practical and meaningful sense, an undiscovered world. We tend to think of exploration as something that happens outward, away from home, into distance. The history of human exploration, as we usually tell it, is a history of going further, further from the familiar shore, further into unmapped territory, further across the surface of the planet, and then, eventually, further into space. Exploration, in this telling, is about expansion, about the conquest of distance. The deep ocean offers a different kind of exploration, one that goes inward rather than outward, down rather than across, into the planet rather than away from it. And there is something in this difference that I think matters for how we understand both the deep ocean and ourselves. The deep ocean has been here all along. It did not require a voyage to encounter it. It is under the water of every ocean on Earth, the majority of which is within a few hours' journey from most of the world's population. It is far from us not because of distance, but because of depth, because of pressure, because of the physical reality that the environment is hostile to our presence in a way that the horizontal surface of the Earth, for all its geographical extremes, is not. The deep ocean is the unknown that is closest to us, right here on this planet, in some cases within sight of inhabited coastlines, and yet is as inaccessible to unaided human experience as any other planet in the solar system. There is something humbling in this, something that quietly disrupts the assumption, so common in the modern world, that the planet is known and managed and understood. The deep ocean does not cooperate with this assumption. It simply continues to exist in its vast, unmapped darkness, full of life that has never needed our understanding or our attention and does not require it now, indifferent to both our knowledge and our ignorance in the absolute way that only very old and very large things can be indifferent. And yet, we are drawn to it. Every expedition that goes down, every underwater vehicle that descends, every camera that sends back images from the midnight zone produces in the researchers watching the footage a response that is recognizably not merely scientific. It is wonder, a particular, specific, slightly uncomfortable wonder that comes from seeing something genuinely unknown. Not unknown in the sense of a puzzle whose solution is known to someone, even if not to you, but unknown in the sense of never having been observed before, never having been part of any human understanding of the world. The first time a researcher sees a species that has never been described, or watches a behavior that has never been documented, or films a structure or a creature or an interaction that no human has ever seen before, the response is not coolly scientific. It is the feeling of the edge of the map, the feeling of the world being larger than you thought it was. We need the world to be larger than we think it is, not just scientifically, but humanly. There is a particular claustrophobia that comes from believing the world fully known, a reduction of possibility, a closing of the imagination, a sense that the picture is complete and nothing fundamental remains to be discovered. The deep ocean is the most powerful available argument against this claustrophobia. It is evidence in the most direct and physical and biological sense that the world is not complete, that the picture has not been finished, that there is more. There is so much more. We began tonight at the water's edge, on the shore of a planet we thought we knew. We looked at the map and found the blank spaces. We went down past the continental shelf, past the sunlit zone, through the twilight and into the midnight, past the hydrothermal vents and across the abyssal plain, into the trenches and the Hadal dark and the very bottom of the world. What we found there was not emptiness. We found pressure that crushes steel. We found creatures that make their own light in a world where no light has ever arrived from above. We found the economy of total darkness, life running on chemistry, on the slow rain of the dead, on volcanic heat, on every resource the deep ocean provides, and on no resource it does not. We found the giants that evolution builds when it has millions of years and no competition from the surface world. We found the traces of things we have not yet found. We found the honest, scientifically grounded, empirically supported possibility that there is more down there, much more than we have ever seen. And we found something else, something harder to name but no less real, the particular feeling of a world that does not know you exist. The deep ocean has been doing what it does for hundreds of millions of years without any awareness of the surface world and its inhabitants. The anglerfish in the midnight zone, dangling its cold light in the dark, it has no knowledge of you. The giant squid hunting in the deep water, its plate-sized eyes scanning the bioluminescent signals of the world below 1,000 meters, it has no knowledge of you. The snailfish drifting through Challenger Deep under 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, the calmest creature in the most extreme environment on the planet, it has no knowledge of you. And yet you are here, in the dark, thinking about them, carrying them with you into sleep, adding them to the set of things you know exist in the world, even if you will never see them, even if no human may ever fully catalog what they are and how many of them there are and what they do in the permanent dark of the world beneath the world. This is what exploration gives you even when you cannot go yourself. Not the experience of the unknown place, but the knowledge that it exists, the expansion of the sense of what the world contains, the deepening of the picture, the quiet, permanent enrichment of understanding that comes from knowing, really knowing in your body rather than just in your mind, that the planet you are living on is larger and stranger and more full of life than you could see from the surface. The ocean floor is out there right now, in the dark, as it has been for hundreds of millions of years. The creatures of the midnight zone are moving through their cold and lightless world, doing what they have always done, producing their cold fire in the permanent dark. The snailfish are at the bottom of the world, unhurried. The siphonophores are trailing their impossible lengths through the water. The marine snow is falling as it always falls, drifting down through the water column from the sunlit surface to the dark deep, carrying the carbon of the world above into the patient, permanent dark below. You are warm. You are at the surface. The world beneath the water is deep and dark and full of things you have never seen and may never see. Sleep well. The deep ocean is keeping its own company tonight. It has always been very good at that.
Every night, without exception, across every ocean on Earth, one of the largest migrations in the history of life takes place. It is invisible. It makes no sound we can hear from the surface. It has been happening for hundreds of millions of years, longer than forests have existed, longer than any land animal has walked the Earth, and we did not discover it until the 1940s, when the first military sonar operators encountered it as a ghost signal, a false bottom that moved. The deep scattering layer rises. That is the core of it. Every evening, as the light fades at the surface and the predators of the sunlit zone become less active, billions of small organisms begin to move upward. Not slowly, at speeds of up to 300 meters per hour in some species, swimming or drifting in a coordinated upward movement that takes them from their daytime depth of 200 to 1,000 meters up toward the surface, where the phytoplankton are rich and the food is abundant. They feed through the night in the relative safety of darkness, and before dawn, as the light begins to return and the surface predators become active again, they descend, back down into the dim twilight, back to the safety of depth. The organisms involved in this migration are small and largely invisible to the naked eye from the surface. Lanternfish, a few centimeters long, small squid, krill, copepods, tiny crustaceans. But their numbers are so enormous that their collective biomass, the total mass of all the organisms making this migration every night in all the world's oceans, is estimated to be in the hundreds of millions of tons. The daily vertical migration is, by total biomass, the largest migration on Earth. By comparison, the great wildebeest migration of the Serengeti, one of the largest land migrations, involves perhaps 1.5 million animals. The daily ocean migration involves numbers so large they are essentially uncountable. And this migration is not merely biological spectacle. It is one of the primary mechanisms by which carbon is transported from the surface ocean to the deep. Every night, the migrating organisms consume carbon-rich material at the surface. Every day, they metabolize it and excrete it at depth, or they die and their carbon-rich bodies sink. This biological pump, the transport of carbon from the surface to the deep by the movement and metabolism of living things, sequesters an estimated 5 billion tons of carbon per year into the deep ocean, where it is effectively removed from contact with the atmosphere for periods of hundreds to thousands of years. 5 billion tons per year. The entire global emissions of carbon dioxide from human activity are approximately 37 billion tons per year. The biological pump of the daily vertical migration is, by itself, offsetting a significant fraction of human emissions, quietly, every night,
in a process that was in place hundreds of millions of years before we arrived, and that continues without any awareness of our existence or our problems. The ocean is not waiting to be managed. It is already managing, in ways we are only beginning to understand.
I want to tell you the story of the 1977 Galapagos Rift expedition in more detail, because it is one of the genuine pivot points in the history of biology, a moment that changed not just what we knew, but what we thought was possible, and because the human details of it are as extraordinary as the scientific ones. The expedition was led by Jack Corliss of Oregon State University and was funded by the National Science Foundation as part of a broader effort to understand the geology of mid-ocean spreading centers. The researchers were geophysicists and geochemists primarily. They were looking for evidence of hydrothermal circulation in the oceanic crust, a process predicted by theoretical models but never directly observed. The biology was almost an afterthought. A biologist named John Edmund was aboard, and the ship carried the deep-diving research submersible Alvin, which could carry 2 or 3 people to depths of 4,500 meters. On February 17, 1977, Alvin descended to approximately 2,500 meters in the region of the Galapagos Rift, the section of mid-ocean ridge between the Galapagos Islands and the South American continent. The researchers had predicted, based on prior temperature measurements of the water in this region, that they might find slightly warm water venting from the seafloor. They prepared for warm water and mineral deposits. What Alvin's lights revealed was, in the words of the researchers aboard, impossible. Not unusual, not unexpected, impossible. By every prior understanding of deep-sea ecology, the density and diversity of life they saw clustered around the vents should not have been there. The deep ocean floor, away from the surface food chain, was supposed to be a biological desert. The abyssal plain was sparse and cold and food poor. There was no mechanism in any existing model of deep ocean ecology that could account for the thriving, dense community of large animals, the giant tube worms, the clams, the crabs, the fish that the submersible lights were illuminating in the water around the warm vents. Jack Corliss, watching the images from inside the submersible, reportedly said, "Isn't the deep ocean supposed to be like a desert? Well, there's all these animals down here." This was the reaction of a careful scientist confronting something that did not fit. Not excitement, that came later. First, the slightly stunned, slightly disbelieving observation that the world was not the way the model said it should be. The subsequent analysis over months and years produced the understanding of chemosynthesis and the vent ecosystem that has since become foundational biology. But the discovery itself, the moment when the lights of Alvin first illuminated the impossible community of life around the vents, was not a moment of triumph or vindication. It was a moment of genuine confusion, of the map being wrong, of the world being different from what the best available science had said it should be. This is what the deep ocean keeps doing. It keeps being different from what the models predict. It keeps producing on every expedition something that the prior understanding of the world did not accommodate. Not because the scientists are bad scientists or the models are poorly constructed, but because the deep ocean is so vast, so poorly sampled, so genuinely unknown that the prior understanding is always, inevitably, incomplete. The vent community was there before we found it, thriving, producing and consuming and cycling, running on chemistry that the surface world knows nothing about. It did not need us to discover it in order to exist. It was simply there, as it had been for millions of years, waiting, without patience or impatience, without any quality of waiting at all, for something to come down and look.
The ocean is not silent. This is one of the more surprising facts about the deep sea,
and one that consistently disrupts the mental image of the abyss as a place of total stillness. The deep ocean is, across certain frequency ranges and in certain locations, one of the noisiest environments on Earth. The reason is physics. Sound travels through water approximately 5 times faster than through air. And in the deep ocean, at a specific depth range where pressure and temperature combine to produce a minimum in the speed of sound, there is a channel, the SOFR channel, the sound fixing and ranging channel, that acts as a natural waveguide. Sound that enters this channel is refracted back toward it from above and below, unable to escape, channeled horizontally through the ocean with almost no energy loss. Sounds introduced into the SOFR channel can travel thousands of kilometers. A whale call introduced into the channel in the North Atlantic has been detected by hydrophones in the North Pacific. The deep ocean is a planetary acoustic system, and it remembers and carries every deep sound the world makes. What sounds does it carry? The grinding of tectonic plates, the rumble of submarine earthquakes, often heard as a low, continuous sound like distant thunder. The explosive decompression of underwater volcanic eruptions, sudden sharp events detectable thousands of kilometers away. The cracking and fracturing of ice shelves in the polar oceans, releasing sounds that are, in some frequency ranges, as loud as anything the ocean produces. And biology, the extraordinarily complex low-frequency songs of blue whales and fin whales, calls that can last for hours and travel for thousands of kilometers, heard by other whales across entire ocean basins. And then the unexplained sounds, the ocean's own anomalies, things that hydrophone networks have recorded and that do not fit any known source. The bloop, as I described earlier, eventually explained as an ice quake, but genuinely mysterious for 15 years. The slowdown, a sound recorded in 1997 that declined in frequency over approximately 7 minutes and has no confirmed explanation. The Julia sound, also 1997, a barely audible rising sound lasting 15 seconds, detected by hydrophones across more than 5,000 kilometers. Possibly the sound of an iceberg grounding somewhere in the Southern Ocean, possibly something else. The West Pacific biotwang, first recorded in the Mariana Trench region, is the most recent of the well-documented unexplained deep ocean sounds. Its 5-part structure, groaning, descending, then suddenly rising to a high metallic tone, has the quality of a signal. Not necessarily a communicative signal from an intelligent source. Biological signals are not necessarily signals in the communicative sense, but something with internal structure, something with a pattern, something that a human ear, hearing it for the first time, registers as having been made rather than having simply happened. It may be a new whale call, it may be a geological sound from the particular geology of the Mariana Trench region, it may be something else entirely. The honest answer, as of the time of writing, is that we do not know. It has been recorded, it has been analyzed, it does not match any known source. It remains in the category of real observations that do not yet have explanations, a category that the deep ocean continues to populate with a regularity that should make anyone who thinks the natural world is fully understood feel quietly, productively uncomfortable. The ocean speaks in frequencies we cannot hear. It carries sounds across distances that exceed our imagination. And among those sounds are things that even now, even with the best instruments we have built, we cannot identify or explain. The deep ocean has a voice. We are still learning its language.
The anglerfish is not beautiful, not in any conventional sense. It is, by the aesthetic standards of the sunlit world, a deeply strange creature, a fish that looks like something assembled from the nightmare logic of deep ocean evolution, all mouth and teeth and cold light, a creature whose very appearance communicates the conditions of the world it was built for. There are approximately 200 species of anglerfish distributed across the deep ocean worldwide.
The females of the deep-sea species, the ones most people mean when they say anglerfish, are typically between a few centimeters and a meter in length, with a large, rounded body, a wide jaw disproportionate to their size, and long, curved teeth that point inward toward the throat so that anything that enters the mouth cannot easily escape. Their bodies are dark, brown or black or deep gray, the color of the deep ocean water around them, invisible in the beam of any light and invisible in darkness. And on the forehead of the female anglerfish, rising from a modified first spine of the dorsal fin, there is the esca, the lure, a small, fleshy, bulbous tip on the end of a long, flexible stalk filled with bioluminescent bacteria that produce a continuous cold blue-white glow in the darkness. The anglerfish hangs in the water, its lure dangling in front of its open mouth, doing nothing, waiting. In a world where food is scarce and metabolic energy cannot be wasted, the sit-and-wait predator strategy of the anglerfish is an extraordinary efficiency. The animal does not pursue its prey, does not hunt, does not expend energy in movement. It simply hangs its light in the dark and waits for something to come and investigate. What investigates is curious, and in the deep ocean, curiosity is dangerous. The smaller fish and crustaceans that are drawn to the anglerfish's lure are drawn by one of the fundamental biological responses to light in the dark, the same response that draws moths to a flame, that draws any light-sensitive organism toward a source of illumination. They approach. The anglerfish does not need to move. Its prey delivers itself to within striking distance, attracted by the one thing in the deep dark that looks like it might be worth investigating. The anglerfish's strike is one of the fastest in the deep ocean. The jaw drops open, expanding to accommodate prey up to twice the size of the fish's body in some species, and the inward-pointing teeth ensure that anything drawn in cannot escape. The strike and the swallowing are, in practical terms, simultaneous. But the female anglerfish is only half the story. The male is something else entirely. The male anglerfish in deep-sea species is dramatically smaller than the female, perhaps a tenth of her length, a tiny, free-swimming creature with large eyes and an exceptionally sensitive olfactory system built for a single purpose. He must find a female. In the deep ocean, at the densities of organisms that live there, finding another member of your species by chance is unlikely. The male anglerfish spends his life following chemical gradients in the water, pheromones released by females, until he locates one. When he finds her, he bites into her body. His jaw latches on to her skin, and then something extraordinary happens. The tissues of his face fuse with the tissues of her body. His immune system, which would normally reject foreign tissue, is suppressed. His circulatory system connects with hers. He becomes, over weeks, a functional parasite, a small appendage-like protrusion on the female's body, her blood circulating through him, her biology sustaining him, his testes producing sperm for her to fertilize her eggs when the time comes. He loses his eyes. He loses his digestive organs. He loses, effectively, his individual existence, fusing so completely with the female that the two become a single organism in almost every functional sense. This is the most extreme sexual dimorphism in the vertebrate world, the most radical fusion of individual identity in animal biology, the most complete dissolution of the boundary between two organisms that vertebrate evolution has produced. It was discovered for the first time in 1922 when a researcher examining a female anglerfish noticed small parasitic growths on her body and assumed they were parasites of some kind. It was not until years later that anyone understood what they actually were. The anglerfish did not evolve this system to be extraordinary. It evolved it because the deep ocean is dark and cold and sparsely populated, and because finding a mate in those conditions is difficult enough that the moment you find one, you had better not let go.
I want to spend some time with marine snow, not with its ecological function, which we have discussed, but with the image of it, with the quality of experience it represents, which is unlike almost anything in the surface world. Marine snow falls continuously, not just in storms or seasons. Every day, every hour, every minute, in every part of every ocean on Earth, the bodies of the dead are drifting downward through the water column. The phytoplankton that die in the surface water, the zooplankton whose fecal pellets contain the incompletely digested material of their feeding, the shed mucus of salps and jellyfish, transparent and light, drifting in slow spirals as it descends, the molts of crustaceans, the bodies of small fish, the scales, the fragments, the residue of everything that has lived in the sunlit zone and died, all of it drifting downward, very slowly, through hundreds or thousands of meters of dark water, toward the seafloor. In the beam of a submersible's lights, marine snow looks like snow. Small white particles drifting slowly past the viewport, some sinking faster, some tumbling, some barely moving at all, distributed through the water column in a density that varies with depth and season and location, but is always present, always visible if the light is strong enough. Oceanographers who have spent time in submersibles describe the experience of watching marine snow as mesmerizing, an effect heightened by the silence and the darkness and the slight unreality of being suspended in the water column, surrounded by a falling that never stops. The journey of a single particle of marine snow, from its origin at the surface to its arrival at the seafloor, takes days or weeks, depending on its size and density and the depth of water it must traverse. During that journey, it is consumed partially by bacteria and by small filter feeders that intercept it in the water column. It loses carbon as it is metabolized. What arrives at the seafloor is a small fraction of what began the journey. But the fraction that arrives is significant. Accumulated over millions of years, the marine snow that reaches the abyssal floor has built up a sediment layer hundreds of meters thick across large areas of the deep ocean. This sediment is not inert, it is biologically active, processed and reprocessed by the community of organisms that live in and on it, cycling carbon and nutrients in ways that affect the chemistry of the ocean above and, through the ocean, the atmosphere above that. The marine snow is the connection between the sunlit world above and the dark world below. It is the food of the abyss. It is the diary of the surface ocean, preserved in layers that record the productivity and composition of the surface water through geological time. And it is falling right now in every ocean, in the dark and the cold, drifting down through the water column as it has drifted for hundreds of millions of years, carrying the carbon of the world above into the patient deep below.
There is something I want to say about the emotional significance of the unknown, about what it means, in the practical and lived sense, to know that there are blank spaces left on the map. We live in a world of information saturation. There are cameras everywhere, sensors everywhere, databases of everything, instant access to the accumulated knowledge of every scientific field, every cultural tradition, every documented human experience. The world as we encounter it digitally is complete, dense with information, cross-referenced, searchable, retrievable in any direction. There are no blank spaces in the world of information. And this completeness, for all its practical benefits, carries a particular cost. The cost is the foreclosure of a certain kind of wonder, the wonder that belongs specifically to the unknown, not to the difficult or the complex or the counterintuitive, all of which are available in any sufficiently deep field of inquiry, but to the genuinely unknown, the thing that has not been seen, not been described, not been incorporated into any human understanding of the world, the blank space. The deep ocean is the last place where blank spaces are not metaphorical, where the absence of knowledge corresponds to a physical territory that has not been explored, a community of organisms that has not been cataloged, a world that is genuinely outside the reach of any instrument or any mind, and that continues to exist in complete independence of our knowledge of it. This is not merely romantic, it is practically significant. The existence of large, unknown biological territory on Earth means that the baseline of biological diversity, the actual number of species with which we share this planet, is unknown. It means that the full range of biochemical strategies employed by living things, strategies that may include biological processes, compounds, adaptations with applications in medicine or technology, or our understanding of fundamental biology, is unknown. It means that the planet's ecological accounting is incomplete. We do not know what we are managing because we do not know what exists. But beyond the practical, there is the human dimension. The deep ocean is available as a source of what I can only call productive humility, the particular state of mind that comes from genuinely confronting the limits of human knowledge and finding those limits not dispiriting, but enlivening, not a reminder of failure, but a reminder of possibility, not the closing of the world, but the opening of it. The deep ocean says, you have not finished, you have not arrived, the picture is not complete, there is more, there will always be more. And tonight, as the surface world goes quiet and your breathing slows and the darkness of sleep approaches, that is perhaps the most valuable thing the undiscovered planet beneath the water has to offer. Not information, not explanation, just the steady, patient, scientifically grounded reassurance that the world is larger than we think it is. It is always larger than we think it is, and that is very good news.